I did a podcast here at the house, and I got down a bottle of vodka, and it wasn't making me funnier. A couple of drinks certainly, but a bottle, and I wasn't as focused, and I was wondering to myself how much longer I could do it and not have something really terrible happen, like fall over dead.
Welcome to the Funny in Failure podcast, a podcast that celebrates failure and shines the light on the emotional side of comedy, with yours truly, Michael Kahan.
Today's guest is a gifted wordsmith, not only articulate and eloquent, but has a free-flowing and easy manner about him. Considering he's been doing this since the 90s, I think we covered a lot of ground, but we still have so much more to discuss, and hopefully we can chat again sometime in the future when we do part twos. Greg is funny, loves his craft, and is passionate about his beliefs. He genuinely has a desire to make the world a better place. Greg also gets real deep about his relationship with alcohol, which I found really inspiring and empowering. I took enormous amount out of his story and his courage to speak out. It was great, and I think you'll love it. Also, upon reflection, another insight I took away from this chat is that it's common to blame others. However, that's genuinely not helpful and actually prevents us from living a better life. I think it's clear that regardless of what someone may have done to us, we have to move forward in our own positive way. Regardless of their views and beliefs, it doesn't help resolve issues or help us move forward, and more on that in the outro. So let's get into it and officially introduce today's guest. Greg Proops is an internationally renowned comedian, as well as an actor, host, stand-up, podcaster, and author, best known for starring on the hit improv-comedy show, Whose Line Is It Anyway? He also has a popular award-winning podcast, The Smartest Man in the World, and one thing I didn't know before researching him is that he's also voiced the character in the US version of Bob the Builder, which is pretty cool. Plus, he's been in many shows and films such as Schooled, Duck Duck Goose, Hell and Back, Star Wars Resistance, Powerpuff Girls, The Night Before Christmas, Flight of the Conchords, Third Rock from the Sun, Star Wars The Phantom Menace, just to name a few. He also has a new stand-up comedy album, which you can check out in the episode notes below. And as you can imagine, we dive deep and we cover a lot, such as his magical pen, Whose Line Is It Anyway?, moving beyond anger, the highs and lows of show business, quitting drinking, his latest improv album, playing Bob the Builder, success and happiness. Before we get into this chat, in case you aren't aware, the videos are now available on YouTube under Michael Kahan. That's Kahan with a K, unless you're listening to it already. I find it adds a new element and dynamic to these chats. I'll still be posting snippets of these chats on Instagram under Funny and Failure, so check them out if you want to stay in the loop for upcoming episodes, or you want to ask a guest a question. I'd also love it if you would share the podcast or share your takeaways from the chat. It really motivates me, helps the podcast grow, and ensures I can lock in amazing guests like this one. And just as a final reminder, the podcast comes out every Monday at 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, with the video to follow the following day. Anyway, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's epic episode. I heard you on another podcast where you were talking about your 7 wonders of the world. And one of your 7 wonders, which I found really interesting, was that you carry a special pen. I'd love you to tell me about this pen.
I'll let you see it right now. It was given to me years ago by a friend of mine named Neil Malarkey. Mind you, it's been replaced a few times because I've lost it over the years. I don't know if you can see it on my
It comes up and then yeah.
Jennifer gave me this.
And that's your wife?
Jennifer's my wife. She gave me this leather case for it. And here's the pen. It's a Mont Blanc silver with a ballpoint. And you have to replace the cartridge because it runs out of ink.
Yep.
And it's generally how I write all my stand-up comedy. In a little book, which I have Well, this is one of them. Oh, you can't see it. Can you see
Your
it?
background's hilarious. I highly recommend
Yeah,
people
there it
tune
is.
into the video. Oh, there it is.
But I have littler books too. And most comedians, and I've done an informal survey over the last few years, like here's one here, a moleskin, a regular moleskin.
Yep.
But I have many different ones. Carry little books with them, even at this late date. Here's a sexy one from someone gave me this one, I think. And you'd think at this day and age, comics would write material on their phone or their computer and then learn it. But because we play live, even though we have our phones with us, I find that most comics still carry a little notebook with them. And it varies in size, but they usually have it. And so in order to have a little notebook with you, you have to have a pen to write down your ideas. So when over the course of a weekend working at a club or at a theater, you run back and you write notes on your jokes, you fix them, right, change the order. The set list that you're going to do is all handwritten. And even when the improv group with Who's Live, with that group that I'm in with Ryan Stiles, we handwrite the order with a magic marker, and then we copy it, and then we give it to the crew and the everybody, and that's the copies we look at on stage. But they're not typed out. They're usually I write it, but no one can read my writing. So sometimes our road manager Morgan or Ryan, who has fairly decent writing, will write it. And so it's just that connection to your brain from your hand that, for me, being able to write something down makes me remember it. Whereas if I type it or put it in my phone, it goes away.
Yeah.
But if I write it longhand, and sometimes cursive, sometimes block letters, I tend to remember it. So that pen I carry with me when I'm doing stand-up gigs because I want to write with that pen. It's my, lucky pen. I don't know if it's magic, but it's certainly sentimental to me. And like I say, I've broken it a few times, and it's an expensive ass pen. And Mont Blanc is a fancy French company. They'll take the pen back and fix it and then give it back to you.
For free, or you still have to pay for
free.
It? Wow. For free.
So once you buy one, it's like being a little less of a twat, but it's like being a Rolls Royce owner.
You should do a sponsorship deal with them because,
right?
You sold it. You should, especially on your podcast.
I know, right? Because if you see me on the podcast, I almost always have that pen in my hand when I'm waving it around. Because during the podcast, of course, I've got papers all around me and I'm reading off of them. And I'll have this and I'll be gesticulating with it all the time. So that was nice of you to remember that.
Remind me the name of the podcast so people can check it out.
It's the smartest man in the world.
Yes. It's really interesting when you talk about that special connection, because I have so many different, there it is. I have probably at least 40 pages worth of notes on my phone. So if I'm walking, I write it down, because when I was carrying a notepad, I didn't want to have to deal with it and find the pocket. But then when I'm writing down something, for example, like a bit for a screenplay, I'll write it on a piece of paper, then obviously type it up. But it's amazing how you just remember it and it stays. But if I write on my phone, I actually forget. I actually have to re-look at it. And so when I'm meditating in the morning as well, I will not go on my phone because I'll forget what I've written. I have a notepad and pen when I'm meditating, and it sticks. It's actually crazy. And, now, like, some of my family friends who are still at school, they do not write. Like, they literally don't know how to write. It's all being typed up, and it's crazy, that connection. I've never been able to define it. It's just, as you said, like magic.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. What do you think it is? I mean, I think you'd have to be a neurologist or a physiologist to really understand why. Like, for instance, I have what do you call it? A filofax. People don't carry these anymore, but I do. And it's here, I'll put it in front of me.
Yep.
It's a leather
calendar,
diary. See, there's a little pen there.
Yeah.
And so, like, for my dates and stuff, calendar dates, gig dates, this, that, things my wife's doing, I'll write it in the book. And then I remember it. I have it on my phone too, like everybody else. I have,
What a
the
complete dinosaur.
the Google and the iPhone calendar and every other bloody calendar. But I still write it in my book too. And then I remember, like, especially because we go on long tours and we'll be in a different city every night, like, let's see, uh, uh, you know, Morgantown, West Virginia, Erie, Pennsylvania, Warren, Ohio, one after the next, night after night. And because I've written it down, people will go, "Where are we going tomorrow?" And I'm like, "We're going to Morgantown." I'll actually remember where we're going,
Oh,
because
nice.
everybody else looks at their phone and they look at it and it just disappears, it evaporates.
I would love to. I'd love to have someone who could, as you said, who could actually define that for me, because it seems to be like a disconnect between the brain. I have no idea why. Sometimes we can also type faster than we can think. And I've heard, like, when you're writing, your brain and the writing is actually like more in symmetry than typing, because you're typing and the brain can't keep up, if that makes any sense. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But in terms of stand up, actually, you've been doing stand up for so many years. What made you actually want to, you talked about mentioning that you asked so many people about their process and they all carry that notepad. Why did you do that? Was that to just, you're curious, or you wanted to maybe improve your craft, or?
Oh, well, the reason I started asking people was because I'm always the oldest. At a certain point in your career, you're the oldest person there.
Yep.
And about 5-7 years ago, maybe more, I noticed people started calling me Mr. Proops. Like, I was always Greg to everybody. And in San Francisco, the Proop Dog. To the podcast people, the Proop Kitten. To one comic, Johnny Steele, Proopadopoulos.
Oh, that's a great one.
Proop Monkey. This, that. And then I hit my 50s and I started going into clubs and theaters, and they would go, "Good evening, Mr. Proops." And I'd be like, okay. So once I reached the Mr. Proops stage, I'm always working with comics in their 20s and 30s, 40s, and everybody's younger than me. And especially because in stand-up comedy, it's one of the last things that you do an apprenticeship, or used to. I think there's lots of people just doing TikTok now and shit. But I mean, it's still, the general idea with comedy is you go to open mics on a Monday or a Tuesday or a Sunday, whatever, an off night, and you wait around for your turn to get up and do your time. And so the people who tend to be the opening act, 9 times out of 10, are probably in their 20s, because they've just started doing comedy. Maybe they're 25, 28, whatever. And so I would see, we'd be in the dressing room, the green room, all 3 of us together. And I would say, I take out my book and go, let me see what you write on. And everyone will fuddle through their stuff and their backpack or whatever, and then pull out a notebook. And only one guy, Irish J, what's his name? Irish J something. He works in Seattle. I said to him, "Do you have one?" The other comic pulled out their notebook and their pen, and he went, "No, if I have an idea during the show for a joke, I write it on my phone." He was the only comic I can think of, and that was maybe 10 years ago, 8 years ago. Literally every comic. And I'm guessing if you asked Jerry Seinfeld, mature, famous. I mean, I don't know that Billy Connolly does stand-up anymore, but if you ask Billy Connolly, he would, I'm wager, have a book, and that he writes out the set by hand. Do you know who Bob Hope was?
No.
Bob Hope was a very famous comedian in the 20th century. And he made his fame during World War II. He was a radio comic and a vaudeville comic and a singer and a dancer. And he made a bunch of pictures. And then World War II, he went around the world performing for the troops. And so an entire generation of people, he was the guy who showed up in the middle of nowhere and fucking told jokes and brought chicks with him, right? There was always chicks. In the war, it was Betty Grable and, whatever. And then in the Vietnam, it was Raquel Welch and, right? As he got older. But so he branded himself so hard in the 40s because at one point, I don't know that he did any gigs that weren't like for the troops. So he really became this. And then, of course, later, he became terribly conservative and horrible, right wing, kind of Nixonian. But I mean, he did stand up for maybe, oh God, he retired in his early 90s or late 80s.
Whoa.
And he'd been doing it since he was probably a teenager. So I'm guessing close to 70 years, And there's a picture of him in an 80s comedy book. And the book's got people you might have heard of, like Larry David, Jerry Seinfeld, Judy Tenuta. And there's a picture of Bob Hope, and he's probably in his 80s, 70s. And there he is, holding up a piece of paper, looking at his set.
That's crazy.
Right? Even he took a pen and a paper and wrote out. And he had a secretary, he had a staff, someone could do it for him. And he had a system where he marked the jokes because he didn't write his own jokes. He had writers.
Oh, really?
When you're really wealthy, yeah. He was.
Let's pigeonhole that.
Yeah. Stand-up comics, people go, oh, do you write your own material? We all do. Until you get to be huge. Like say you're on telly, and maybe not in Oz so much, but certainly in America and England, if you're hosting a telly show, you haven't written those jokes.
Yeah, I understand that. But in terms of
there's
stand-up,
20 guys in a room, 20 comics in a room, and they're doing that for you. And maybe you throw in a few, or maybe your job is to go through them and edit them. But you're certainly not going to be the one sitting around thinking of your monologue that day.
That's the goal, isn't it? To have people. It would be interesting. Is that something that you'd like? To have a team of 20 people write jokes where you get up there and bam?
I wouldn't say no, because I think the advantage of that is obviously more minds. But I'm always a big fan of other people throwing you a curveball, So I would think, oh, I can't do that. And then someone might write a joke and be like, you can do that joke. And then I would be like, could I or couldn't I, Because I've had comics, I write with comics over the years. You sit down and you start riffing. And I remember a comic that was a friend of mine in the 80s. I think I had a Hiroshima joke or something. The joke wasn't that Hiroshima was funny. The joke had Hiroshima in it or something.
Yeah.
And she said, I can't do that joke. You can do that joke. And so I did the joke, but she just didn't want it,
Interesting.
Because her act was so wholesome and schlocky and mainstream that if she suddenly threw in this Hiroshima, or like we just worked with a comic at New Year's, two comics, two women, Jill Margos and Jaya Lakshmanayan, and we were writing a joke backstage that I put on my new album. And Jill gave me this other joke, which was I went to the doctor and I asked for Intervectin, and the doctor said, nay, right? Which is really lame, but it's hilarious. And I said, Jill, why don't you do that joke? And she went, it doesn't fit in my act. Her act is about her husband and, domestic stuff and watching TV. And, like her act is a mainstream middle America, and my act is raging against things. So a COVID joke fits right into my act.
There's a few things that you said. Actually, we'll go this way. I think I saw that you used to be a host of a TV show. Am I correct? So
I've hosted several TV shows.
Yeah. So wouldn't you have also
quite
had
unsuccessfully over the years?
Oh, very nice. Do you say that you have done successfully?
I hosted a dating show. I've hosted game shows. Hosted a game show in Scotland called Space Cadets. That was a really fun one. That was some time ago, mind you.
So that's awesome to hear. But wouldn't you have had people writing for you as well in those situations?
I did.
Yeah.
I did on those occasions. The dating show, we had a staff, and this one might interest you. 9/11 happened during the dating show. So we came back from hiatus, and all of a sudden I had to do the opening, right, of the dating show. And so there was a jib camera, the one that swings in the air, and it would swing up to me, and I'd go, well, tonight we've got a couple whose meets in Hollywood, but you don't know where this is going to end. Everybody, it's time for run, and I do the intro. So get back from 9/11. It's been a terrible 2 weeks, like everyone's depressed. And all of a sudden, the jib camera's got a flag on it, an American flag. So I let that go for a couple of weeks. Oh, and the producers freaked out because everyone was so depressed when we came back. And they didn't get up and talk to the cast and crew. I was the cast, the crew. They said, will you say something? Like they made me, the host of the show, get up. So in front of all the camera people, the editors, the backstage, the lighting, there's, the 50, 60 people.
Yeah, at least, yeah.
I got up and I said, blessed are the poor, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the meek, or blessed are the poor in spirit, for the, blah, blah, blah. I read the Beatitudes. And then there was some quotes from Lincoln about peace and whatnot. None of this fucking flag waving, let's go bomb the Arabs into submission, because I just don't play that. So here's the joke part. We had a joke in the script before I left that was, this guy's so dumb, it was like George W. Bush, blah, 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 right? It was a George W. Bush being an idiot joke, which were very popular from the very beginning.
I remember that.
Not just after Katrina, they were popular from 1999 all the way to 2008. And when I got back, I picked up the script and it said Osama bin Laden in the place of W. And I said, this isn't funny. And they go, what? And I go, you can't substitute Osama bin Laden for George W. Bush. Those aren't the same person. And they're not the same person comedically. Yep. Like comedically, W represents a moron and a privileged idiot. And Osama bin Laden at that time was just, scoundrel, evil, blah, blah, blah. And I swear to God, one of the producers on the show turns to me and goes, this is no time to make fun of the president. And I went, it's a dating show. I said, we're getting people drunk and hoping they shag. I go, like, what is this? All of a sudden, we're making fun of the president. I go, no one's looking to us to support democracy. We're literally hoping people give each other digital manipulation in a van. And you're talking about the president. But it really happened. It really happened. So that was a time a writer, I came in and the writing was literally the words George W. Bush had been taken out and the words Osama bin Laden had been put into the place.
Wow. Well, can you imagine and now for the 6 p.m. news, no, we've just come in and we've got this new dating show and everyone in America is waiting for you to do the monologue or speech about it.
Right.
The concept of that they would go through a dating show, and if anything, the dating show is to not think about that. It's to go to what you're talking about. That is hilarious. I'm glad that you moved past that. You can see the humor.
It was pretty wild.
I'm just rambling, but you mentioned something that's very interesting. Like you mentioned that was long ago, but then you mentioned that comedian, I've already forgotten his name. He's been doing it for 70 years. And I would imagine with comedy, and you've done so many different things in your career, but there's the highs and lows. So it looks like you got a story.
Of course there are.
So I'm just interested in how you view it, because one day you're the host of a TV show, and then the next day maybe you're not, and every year would have different challenges. How have you been able to kind of put that into perspective? Kind of preface.
Well, I'm as depressed as the next person. But I try to think of it at the bottom line. I think all performers feel the same thing. And that's, are you still able to work and are you still able to perform for the people you want to play for? And I still am. So
nice.
I'm on the road with Who's Live, with Ryan and whatnot. And since the plague subsided somewhat at the end of last year, when they started to let people go back out on tour, because in the States it was real, some people were going out and they were getting COVID. And, there were clubs full of people and everybody in the club would get COVID. And I mean, it was bad, They shouldn't have been doing it, but of course, this is America, so no one's going to tell us what to do. You know the story. You're in Oz. And although you guys were locked down a lot more than us, and
Yeah, unfortunately.
I was in California, so we were locked down more than most.
Yes.
So when it all, and also we're all cautious, So when the autumn last year, when we all started to go out again, we had to rebook all the dates from the 18 months of no performing. So we're playing 100 and something dates in a year now. I mean, I'm on the road a lot. So that keeps it in perspective because I'm busy. And then, but it's true about getting older in show business. And like, I'm not going to be asked to host a TV show now, unless it was very specialized and maybe a documentary or something like that, because they're always looking for 30 something people and 40 something people.
Is that just the Hollywood model? Like, do you know why they do that, or?
They think it matters to the public. I don't think it does, but
Yeah,
they
I agree
do.
with you.
I used to watch old time comics on TV when I was little, and I always thought they were funny. I didn't really complain that they were 70 and that I was 9. I still so it's just a showbiz thing, like women have it worse than men. Women get turned out to pasture when they're like 30 years old,
It's crazy.
Men start to really get booked in movies and TV when they're in their late 30s, early 40s is when it really, really, I mean, how many men were still playing leads in their 60s and 70s? And they're, no one goes, oh my God, you're so old.
Yeah, it's
I
very.
don't know if that answered your question. I mean, like I said, I bum out like anyone else. And sometimes want, more out of show business. But the truth is, you sort of get out of it how much you want. If I was really, really knocking my head against the wall every day, I'm sure I would be doing more things in show business. Also, the 2 years off kind of put everything in perspective.
Oh, can you expand on that?
Yes. Staying at home with my wife and seeing my wife for 2 years was different because even though we're very close and spend a lot of time together, I was often gone, as I said, for the last, 25 years. And so we would only go to cool places together, like Australia or New York or London or Paris or whatever. So I didn't take her to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and Bellingham, Washington, and whatnot. And so you realize sort of that at once that show business isn't particularly important in the giant scheme of things. And yet, on the other hand, of course, because I'm a needy performer, I started to go mad. I did Zoom shows, loads of
That'd
them.
be hard.
Yeah, I did Zoom stand-up shows, Zoom improv shows, and Zoom podcasts through the whole thing. And not till about 2 months in, when a friend of mine hipped me, and I did them, and then I do Instagram lives, just turn on the Instagram and just blather for an hour. But it wasn't the same as doing live performing, and I haven't gone back to it the way I did. I still do Zoom comedy shows every once in a while, but once the live performance started again, everybody went right back to the theaters and the clubs. And I said to my wife, oh my God, no one's going to care anymore. No one's going to want to come to see our show. Everyone's realized that their life's in perspective. And she said, no, as soon as everyone can get out, they're going to go out. And so we've been playing to really, the houses are full. We pretty much sell out almost every show. And
wow. In terms of both the improv, the stand-up, I know that you do podcasts with your wife, and I'm not sure how often you do it live, but that's 3 different streams.
Yes. Well, I used to do it live all the time, but I haven't done it live since New Year's. In the last 2 years, the only time I've done it live is at New Year's last year in San Francisco, which I'll do again this year, New Year's, because it was too COVID-y. And the clubs that they want me to be in for the podcast are dinky. with no ventilation. And I was just like, I can't do this. It's not just me getting it too. My worst fear was that I would be exposed to it and then give it to everybody, so that the headline would say the next day, 45 people come down with COVID at the Greg Proops show.
Yeah, I certainly understand that. I get where you're coming from. Did it bring about this sense of, so obviously you have to like reevaluate like what you want, and you spend time with your wife, and I guess it took away from the ease and the pressure of Hollywood, because speaking to every guest, everyone, including me, we've got that. We have to keep on be working. We have to keep on doing something. And one of the positives of this whole COVID situation is that it's forced us to not be like that, because we can't. So if you come out with kind of like a new appreciation of your craft.
I do. I'm a little more motivated to focus on it. I've quit drinking.
I heard that's very exciting.
I'm not drunk and high when I perform, and I try to appreciate the time on stage moment by moment a lot more. The other reason for that, of course, is I'm getting older, but underneath it all, and this is a really terrible thing to tell you, Mark, the government that we had when COVID hit here, with Orange 45 and all those criminals, made it 1,000 times worse than it could have been. If we'd had a real president who wasn't a criminal traitor to Russia. Sadly, England and America had those kind of people. They had Boris and we had 45. And you guys had, you're conservative, but he seemed to be pretty aware of COVID. He didn't pretend that it didn't exist. And our government decided that it would be this great thing if they waged war on science and demonized everybody who tried to stop the spread of COVID. And when he got it, you remember he got it, and he rode around in a car and pressed his face up against it and then ran up the steps, and he was all out of breath. They'd given him all this medicine. And then he went to rallies all the time where it was really dangerous and people got COVID at his rallies and stuff. And I'll never forgive them for that. Ever, ever. I'd like to be a big person. I'd like to say that I'm full of charity and that my heart is really large and I have room for everybody. But I don't. And they also robbed young people of 2 years of their life that they could have had experiences. People who were older, if you were really, imagine if you were like 85 and it happened. So great, now I get to spend 2 years not doing, and not getting to see my grandchildren, I think the human cost of it, and not to mention the 1 million+ people that are dead in this country. I live in Los Angeles. The body count here is 33,000 since it started. And I think that's probably more than all of Australia, you know. And
by far, yeah.
Yeah, but Los Angeles is a big place. We probably have half the population of Australia, you know, or I think we have more people than Australia. We have 40 million people in California and 10 million people in Los Angeles. But I was really having a good time going around the world and performing, and I really feel like resentful and hateful of the Republican Party in this country and the Russians who started all this nonsense. And we have enough corrupt politicians that they went with it. What happened in England with Brexit, I'm very, you know, I play in England a lot and in close relationship with the English for 30 years. And to see their country brought down to this level where bands can't tour anymore and they don't have food and their heating bills are going up. I don't know if you've seen what's been going on in England. Their healthcare is falling apart. And it's all because of Brexit and right-wing authoritarian bullshit. And so I know that wasn't the funniest thing I could have said, but
No, I hear you, because this has come up at various times on the podcast, and I hear everything that you're saying, and I hear your pain. But there's also that one component, and it's a lot easier said than done, obviously, that there's so many uncontrollables, and you and me can't control a lot of that stuff. Doesn't mean there's not a lot of hurt and pain, but holding on to that, and I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying in general,
Yeah.
we can't, carrying on to that can take away also from the creative process, but also like our well-being and mental health. And obviously there's certain things that have happened, and everyone's experienced this to certain degrees, but the holding on aspect can be very tough. So in those moments that you're not thinking about that, and I know it's in our face, have you still been able to go back to the love of your craft? Like when you're doing, whose live is it anyway? You're not thinking about that. When you're doing your podcast, I know that it's quite a political one. I'm sure you're still channeling it in a way of love, in your way of love. Or when you're doing stand-up, yeah, you talk about these things. It's still like your love and passion of the craft. So you still have those moments of like being pure, or not pure, that's probably not the right word, but being able to hone in your craft and enjoy it.
Absolutely. They can't take away your joy. And the one thing art always can do is provide metaphor, and metaphor is how we live our lives. We can't live them literally. If you do, you go crazy. I talk about it with our tour manager a lot, because we tour the country and some states act like it never happened. Other states are more concerned. Other places, they wear masks, this, that. There's still COVID procedure, protocol. And other places that they literally act like it, not only did it not happen, it never happened. And which I think is as bad as you're saying. Holding on to it's awful, because it does create a burning ulcer inside you. But letting it go too soon and just pretending it didn't happen is lunacy. And we say there's no dealing with the overwhelming. It's too overwhelming to deal with as a human. So our reaction as people to the millions of dead people and the tens of millions of people who suffered and are suffering is to move on with our lives and laugh and create and dance and listen to music and do all the things we always wanted to do that we weren't able to do as much during it. And it doesn't make us bad people. I think what makes bad people is people who try to erase the last 2 years and don't deal with that it really did happen. Because there's always going to be another plague. We've seen with climate change and everything, the climate change creates this atmosphere of that plagues are going to be, and of course, heedless countries that don't give a shit about anyone's public safety. But anyway, yeah, I think you're right. I do need to let it go. And I do. The truth is, when it was going on and we were locked down and he was in office, I woke up in an absolute boiling fury of depression every day. And then when he lost and Biden and Harris came in, it really did make a huge difference to everyone's psyche. There was an expression here when he was in, you would wake up and there would be that blissful 3 or 4 seconds before you remembered he was president.
I hear what you're saying. I've always come from like this health perspective, and regardless if my ideal party's in, I can't, because I just can't give. There's only so much, even if it's the best party in the world, can do. I just go with the philosophy. I can only control what I control in those moments of my absolute madness, because everyone's experienced it. Even if you're right or left or middle, you don't give a shit. Everyone's suffered. It can be really hard, but I don't think you're giving yourself the credit to what you've been able to achieve, because you're going back to do these live shows. Your podcast is very successful. You're doing stand-up. You've got a new album, which we're going to talk about. You've been able to achieve a lot. And even in these moments of madness, which we all have, you are still like thriving and doing well. And more importantly, I'm sorry for cutting. I can see you want to say something.
No.
Like you've quit drinking and you said you're not as high as much, or maybe you've quit smoking. That is so tough. This is like the perfect time to go back to our addictions, because it's overwhelming. And that is a tough pill. So huge credit to you. I want to know why you did that, because like I've gone to sugar, which I'm not like comparing addictions, but sugar numbs. I don't know if you're familiar. Sugar can numb you and take you away from the world if you have a lot of it, which I've done. And during like the start of all of this, regardless of what was going on, it's just a way of not really wanting to feel. And then when you're feeling this much, and you've obviously got huge compassion for people, to do that is very tough. It's probably the hardest time to do it. So tell me why you decided to do that.
Well, I agree with you. And I've found that sugar is the new thing that I have to break myself of. I was able to do it on the road, but I've been we've been off for like a month and I've been hanging at home and I'm really gorging on sugar. I ate a bunch of chocolate today.
Yeah.
Also, when you quit drinking, it changes the metabolism. So I didn't lose any weight. Everybody tells me they lose weight when they
That's
quit drinking because I started eating like 4 or 5 candy bars after the show, like I just, and then I quit doing that. So I lost some of the weight back. And then now I'm sort of in between. The reason was, I've always promoted drink on the podcast, as Mr. Vodka. And during the live performances of the vodcast, we called it a vodcast, I'd get down a good deal of vodka, sometimes 5, 6, 7 drinks. And I could go through a bottle pretty much if I really put my mind to it. And I didn't quit drinking when the lockdown happened. We really weren't allowed to go anywhere or do anything in LA for about a year and something. I mean, you could, but it was, you could go to the supermarket, So I was really getting it on with the alcohol. And it wasn't like Friday night, it was every night. And then when you're really doing hooked on something, like you go, well, I won't do it for a while, to see if I can handle. And so that little while would be like a day or 2 days, maybe. And then we were doing the podcast here July 9th, 2021. Mind you, this is well after the lockdown.
Yep.
And I did a podcast here at the house and I got down a bottle of vodka. And it wasn't making me funnier. A couple of drinks, certainly, but a bottle. And I wasn't as focused. And I was wondering to myself how much longer I could do it and not have something really terrible happen, like fall over dead. And so that next day we got up and I was cleaning the house with my wife and I said, that's it. I'm not going to drink. I'm stopping. And at that point it was, I'm stopping till I want to start again. And, I didn't make a vow to the moon and stars that I was quitting. And then pretty much since then, it's been like, I just don't, I was tempted once on the road a couple months ago. So it was a stressful night. And we always have drink backstage, which was another thing because I was on the road before the plague. We were on the road 80, 90 days a year. And there's always drink. A comedian's life, a jazz musician's life, so it's full of drink. And I would drink after the show, like really drink. And no one was saying anything because I still showed up every day and was funny. And, so that's kind of why I stopped, that I wasn't enjoying it. And I felt like I don't want to be the comic that you saw that was drunk and slurry. And, like everybody who quits, I think about all the things that I maybe oughtn't to have done. I wasn't the kind of person who blacked out and had everybody tell me what I did the night before. I wasn't that person. Much more of a quiet drunk, by myself, listening to music. That was my big.
Oh, interesting.
I would watch videos till the frosty dawn and just drink and drink and drink, like Sam and Dave and Chaka Khan or whatnot, like just watch old videos. And I didn't go out and carouse in bars or anything like that, or do coke or anything. I didn't include all that. I was just quietly got shit faced. And so it wasn't, but I didn't, during the podcast and at the improv show, I would have too much to drink, and I don't want to be that comic that people saw and went, he's supposed to be so funny, but he was just kind of drunk.
Thank you for bringing that. We've had so many examples of people going through this, but it's very important. Everyone's got addictions and everyone's got stuff that can potentially hold them back. So it's very important. How do you feel now that you've made that transition?
Well, it hasn't been that long. It's been a year.
I'll change your language on that one because that's
okay.
Yeah, that's great.
It's been over a year. It was a year in July. I'm glad because I don't have to worry about it now. Like, my first goal when I got to places before was, where am I going to get a drink? And then if there was no drink for after, where was I going to get a bottle for myself so that I could, so I worried about things like that. And now I don't really worry about things like that. And I'm more together on stage and, all that. So I feel good about that. And then, of course, there's also, like I said, it's impossible not to remember some of how drunk you might have been at different places. And I think I might have handled that differently. But it's not as bad now as it was when I first quit. When I first quit, I was very guilty about everything.
Of course.
My wife would say to me, you weren't that kind of drunk that, no one got in my face all the years I was drunk and went, you should really stop because you're blowing it. Do you know what I mean? I was functioning, as they say.
Do you feel more funny?
I feel as funny, which I wasn't sure I could do. And I know there's lots of other comics and musicians and artists in the same bag. Part of being an artist or creator is angst. And whether it's self-created angst or genuine emotional angst or angst at the world, whatever. And when you're used to drinking a lot and handling that, and you remove it, there's the whole shit, am I still funny thing, which I really did go through. I mean, when I did stand-up drunk, I wasn't like blotto drunk because it's impossible to do that. But say around the second show, I'd start drinking and then like have a few drinks on stage during the late show. So now by the time you get off, you're feeling pretty good, and then you carry on drinking. On a bad night, just drunk the whole time,
Yeah.
So I regret that. And I feel bad for everybody that saw me that didn't think I was funny, because I feel like I cheated them.
Interesting. Because I have heard you've got a different take with stand-up versus improv. How stand-up, and please correct me if I'm wrong, these might not be the exact words, stand-up's more for you and you do it more for yourself. Obviously, you still want the audience to have a good time, but improv's more collaborative.
Yeah.
Yeah, is that how you see it?
Very much so. You're on a team when you do improv, you're in a group. So I can't step out of the group and start giving my opinion. I can, but only one line here and there. Whereas a stand-up is my baby and you're all on your own and you have the conch. And so you lay down the law, when you're stand-up. To mix metaphors even more horribly, stand-up is a laser beam because I can focus it precisely where I want it to go and make it do what I want, either to destroy or create or eliminate. And improv is riding in a boat backwards down a stream, because you can't control where you're going. You only know what you've just done. So wherever you've been, and so that mindset, and the podcast is a mixture of the two. Podcast, I have material, that I'm going to read or that I'm going to look at, and then when I would get to the live show, people would give me books and articles and magazines and pieces of art and tchotchkes. And that would change the show. All of a sudden, the show's about the tchotchkes and the show's about the books and what I remembered and what I felt. And so there was that awesome symbiosis where the audience provides the impetus for your comedy, the jumping off point. And that's the way I like to do the podcast. Make a mistake. Don't go back and correct the mistake. Amplify the mistake.
Oh, interesting.
Illuminate the mistake. Illustrate the mistake. Repeat the mistake. Reiterate the mistake until the mistake becomes funny and that becomes part of the joke. So
I like that. That's going to help me.
Leonard Cohen, forget your perfect, something cracks are where the light shines through.
Yes. Yeah.
So he's absolutely right. If you don't make a mistake, there's no fixing it. And in the fixing, sorry, I just dropped something on the floor.
No, we're good.
In the fixing, and in the podcast in particular, I mean, I did it in the stand-up too. I'm an honest stand-up comedian. If you see me and it's not going well, I learned this in England. I would say to the crowd, it's not going very well right now.
Acknowledgement.
Yeah, and then go, but I'm hoping, and you're hoping that it's going to get better. And that always puts the audience at their ease, because then you're acknowledging that it sucks.
You're on the same team.
Yeah, but with the podcast, I always wanted to freewheel it, and so that's the difference. With improv, it's all the way one way, and with stand-up, it's all the way the other way. Although in stand-up, I improvise too. If I wasn't able to improvise, like for instance, the album I just did, I improvised it, and I improvised the album before that, the one from 2018, but I didn't tell anyone I improvised it.
Is it that? Yeah, go on.
I mean, I didn't announce it, and I didn't put it on the album. And so this time when I did it, I said to my producer, let's put on the album, on the front of it, this album was improvised, because everybody's like, oh my God, how can you do it? But I didn't tell anyone. I already did a couple albums where I didn't improvise. I didn't write it at all.
I think it's a really cool idea, and I saw it on the album title as well. It also adds to it. It's more fun to know that and that kind of ties back also with the writing. You mentioned there how if you write on your notepad, you can remember it a lot better. When you're doing these improvised albums, and obviously you've been doing improv for God knows how many years, did you have a rough idea of what you wanted to talk about? Did you have
Yes, I had non-written out material. Like material is one thing. You write out all the jokes, all the lines, all the beats. You hone it, you go on stage with it, you add to it, you take away from it, you fix things, you reword it. With this stuff, I had done some of the ideas on stage. I had other ideas that I hadn't fully exploded or exploited or explored. And I went with those. And then there was one or two little items that I had done in Zoom shows during the plague. And one was this really stupid routine about ZZ Top. One of the members of ZZ Top passed away last year, the bass player. And on the night at the Zoom show, I went off on a tangent about ZZ Top. And then when I did this stand-up album, all I remembered was that I had done this tangent about ZZ Top. So I had one or two crappy lines, and then I just made up the whole thing after that. And so, yes, it didn't come out of whole cloth like Ross Noble or who's the other, there's a Scottish comic too, Phil Kay. Yeah. Phil Kay and Ross Noble, their whole thing is they walk on stage like Keith Jarrett in the old days, the jazz musician. Keith Jarrett used to sit at the piano like this, and then he'd start to play. And he didn't know what he was going to play. And there's a couple of albums from the 70s. One's called the Conchords, where he's in Sweden or Norway, wherever Coln is. And that was a thing that he was famous for, Keith Jarrett, because he's a virtuoso. He could play classical music, could play jazz music. He was in Miles Davis's band. He's probably 70-something years old now. I've seen him play. he's a horrible human being on stage, but he's a brilliant pianist. And so he really is. He's just a terrible personality. And when he's not talking, he's a genius, Yep. And he used to sit down and literally not know what he was going to play. And I think Ross, who I've worked with and I know for a long time, and Phil, I've known them both. I've known Phil a really long time, but I've worked with Ross in Canada like 7 years ago. And we were both playing the same club. So I went up and did my set, and then I watched him go up after me and do his set. And my set, I had jokes and routines and shit. And I watched Ross get up there and just, blah, blah, blah,
Wow.
And so his premise is that he really doesn't know what he's going to do at all. Whereas I had more of an idea.
Even
not the written out beats that you would develop over the course of working on material and fixing it.
I'm wondering I've got so many questions on this, but I would imagine the comic in you would probably be more scared of doing something like this 20, 30 years ago, because that is very scary. I know you've got the improv background, but to do a whole hour of stand-up would be very hard improvised, or that never really bothered you? It wouldn't have bothered you?
It would have probably more. There's the brilliant thing about when you start is you're kind of fearless because you don't know how terrible you are.
Yeah.
And so you really have no fear that you're going to blow it because you think you're so great and you have the fearlessness of being young. Then when you learn a little something, of course, you start to see where the cracks are and how everything works. And then you fall into the danger of maybe repeating yourself, which I have done. And then now, of course, I have the confidence of, one, I know I'm going to be funny, and two, I have a voice, and the voice is that I know my opinion and I know my point of view. And so when I start in on something, it's going to not sound like everybody else because I've developed my own style, for lack of a better word. What happened there? I didn't mean to do that.
No,
I
good.
touched the button. Anyway, so yeah, I would have been probably more scared then, or scaredier. And like I say, I've done 3 records that I can think of that I really did it that way, that I had ideas, that I had notions, that I thought about stuff, and then I did them. And I have 4 or 5 other records where everything has been. The problem is I have a few records where I did the routines before they were perfected. So there's routines on some of my records, and then unbeknownst to you or anyone else, I would carry on doing them in my stand-up and clubs and add to them and make them bigger and funnier and blow them up more. And so there's a bunch of what I consider half-assed routines on a couple of albums because I took all that material that I was working on when I made the album and worked on it more.
That's what makes a
it
great
should have been
comedian.
another album of it.
Yeah, but that's what makes a great comedian is that you perfect it and you build on it. Something that you said, and I know we could talk about this for ages, so we'll just see how we go. Finding your voice is the most important thing, pretty much in life, but it's really amplified as a comedian. And I heard you in other podcasts, I can't even remember where, but your relationship with confidence. Something happened to you where it just kind of clicked. I think you were touring around the world, but when did you kind of realize that you're actually funny and you can do this and that you're going to be okay? I know there's moments where you're like, oh, what's going to happen? When did you realize that this confidence was instilled in you?
Well, I've done it since I was a teenager, and then I had to change tack a bunch of times. And then
why did you have to change tack?
I was in a team with a fellow in the early 80s, and he quit. And so I lost a little bit of my confidence, and I didn't know if I could do it on my own. And then I joined an improv group after that. And I was in an improv group for a couple of years, and we wrote sketches and did improv. So I got very confident doing that. And that was when I was 24 and 25. And then that group broke up. And then I started doing stand-up on my own for real. And I was probably about 26 at that point. So I'd done stand-up comedy and improv since I was 18, 19. Or even in high school, we did it, but it was very funny. And then I went to England in 1989. And after that, I went over in like 92. And then I started touring England in 93. And that's when I think I became overconfident. That's when I became so confident. And it was playing for foreign crowds. And it was playing in Scotland and Wales and Ireland and all over England. And realizing that you could communicate with people who you didn't grow up with, that don't share the same cultural references, that you're having to be in their world and exist in their world and have to be something they can recognize and identify. And it made me more confident. I came back to the States and I wasn't worried at all about what was going to happen on stage.
Wow.
Because when I say worry, I mean the anxiety of like the unpredictable or the unknown. As far as concern for the show, of course, the reason why comics don't want people to heckle isn't so much that we think we're precious little pups and everything was a poem. It's that often the way you're telling the joke, the wording of it, and the meter and the cadence and the way the sentences run is what you're trying to perfect. And so when you're trying to say something in a very specific way and you're trying to do it every night and make it even more specific and more funny, and someone goes, hey, fuck you, or hey, Buddy Holly, or whatever, it has nothing to do with your work. The work that you're doing is trying to write these jokes and make the jokes live their life. And someone's interrupting with their drunken, idiotic bullshit. And that's why people hate it.
The rhythm.
People go, oh, it's a part of comedy. It is, but it's not a great part. And then hecklers will often say, I'm trying to help the show. And that's because they don't understand what you're doing. And why should they? They're not comedians. A lot of people think comedy's magic and that the comics are literally making it up as they go along.
Well, the good ones make it feel like that.
Yeah, and the good ones make you feel like that. So that was always my problem with heckling.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. It's more taken away from the groove, and especially like, I'm not saying that you do this, but if you're coming in, it's new and it's fresh, you're trying to rote learn it, you're trying to get it right out there, then it takes away from it, and it can kind of create like a fragmented mind almost in a sense. Yeah. Okay, there's like 100 things I want to discuss. I think that's really cool that when a comedian or someone finds their voice, I think everything's a lot easier. It doesn't mean there's not highs and lows, but that really helps because your point of view, which especially from improv, is the key. There's 2 points on that. Now, if a show doesn't go that well or you re-listen to your improvised album, do you beat yourself up? What's the relationship there? Do you handle it a little bit better, or are you more of a perfectionist?
But if it doesn't go well?
Yeah,
no, I try to make it go well. I'm very, very mindful of what's going on with the audience minute by minute and second by second. So if I find that it's not going well, I will try to fix it. There have been nights when I've given up on crowds and I didn't give a shit anymore about them and I wanted them to all go away. But in general, I will try to make it happen because I want you to. There was a baseball player named Joe DiMaggio.
Yep.
And everybody knows him because he was married to Marilyn, but he was quite a good player and he was very emotionless on the field and quite perfect. He had a perfect swing and he threw really hard and he ran hard and he didn't fight. And there was no showboating. He never waved his hat. He never high-fived anyone. He just kept to business. And someone once asked him, why do you try so hard every day when you're out there on the field? There's days you could ease up, And he went, and he had no sense of humor, Jeff DiMaggio, went, because someone out there might not have seen me play before. And so the seriousness that takes, like, there's probably someone out there who hasn't seen me. And the first time they see you is the time they're going to remember. And everybody establishes themselves the first outing. Yeah. And if they see you again, maybe they'll change their mind. But like, I want them to think the first time they see me, oh, you knew what you were doing and you didn't fucking give it up. And I remember doing a set years ago and someone wrote online something about it. It was just a set in LA at a club. It wasn't even particularly important. And they wrote, finally, I get what Greg's doing, because he leaves it all on the field.
Interesting.
So I did this elaborate routine about Hawaii that has loads of metaphors in it, and it goes on and on and on. And it's really wordy, and it has to be said in a certain way. And the guy was like, "Oh, I see what you're doing. You're really," because as well as just being an asshole or like an erudite person who thinks I'm smarter than you or whatever. I am actually trying to get across the message and communicate.
It's not just a complete ego trip.
No, it's all about connecting.
Oh, that's a great word. I'm glad that you used that. Oh, I got 100 points, but going slightly off topic in terms of, so you're doing stand up and then improv, you're doing that together. I know I heard this, but I don't know if it's true that you saw an improv show and you're picked out of the audience and then you pretty much started working with. That is crazy. That never happens.
It's absolutely true. I was at San Francisco State, 1979, and mind you, I was only 14 years old, and I was living in the dormitory, and there was a cantina on campus, and the cantina had improv show on like Tuesday night or whatever it was, and I went and saw it, and I'd done stand up. I was 19. I'd probably been doing stand up a couple of years, and I'd never seen improv. I'd heard of it kind of, like, what? I'd heard of sketches and this stuff. So I went and watched. And here's the part of the story that I always like to throw in. The modern artist from the Cool School here in California, there was an artist named Edward Kienholz. And he was a very accomplished artist. And he used to these giant pieces and whatnot. And when he was little, his parents took him to see an art show. And there was a Rembrandt in the show. And his reaction was, he was a child. He was probably 10 or 11. He looked at the Rembrandt and he thought, I can do that. And when I was watching this improv show when I was 19, I literally thought to myself, I can do this. I don't need any training. I don't need nothing. I will be able to do this. So they did an audience spot where they would go, now can we have a member of the audience? Thank goodness this all happened, or I never would have. And so a guy got up.
You wouldn't have done, sorry for cutting you off, as in you wouldn't have done improv, or you think you would never have discovered it?
I don't know. It was just fortuosity, like these are the moments in your life that, what does Cormac McCarthy say? The machinery of life has come clanking to this moment. What is that movie where he says, call it?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Your life and your death depends on whether it's heads or tails. Well, so I went to this show. They pulled someone out of the audience. And I said to myself, I'm going back next week. I didn't tell anybody, by the way. I was by myself. And the next week I went back and I sat in the front, right in front of the stage. And in those days, it wasn't chairs, it was the floor because it's college. So a bunch of people on the floor and then a bunch of people on the chairs. And I waited for the, when do you, and thought, I didn't know if they were going to do it or not because I didn't know the people in the cast. Finally, they go, can we have a volunteer? And before anyone could volunteer, I stepped up on the stage because I was right here. I walked right onto the stage. And they said, okay, let's have a suggestion. And it was a Mooney and a wino in a bus stop or something like that. And a Mooney is a cult member from the old days. There was a minister from Korea named Sung Young Moon, and he ran a thing called the Unification Church. And they had many adherents. His son is still a anti-vaxxing right-wing crazy person. In any case, they were called Moonies. And a Mooney meant you were, hi, I need money, the thing that we always think of, religious cult. And I can't subscribe to that. Yeah, I can't remember if I was a drunk or the Mooney. I think I was a Mooney. So I did the sketch, the improv. And the next day I was playing pinball. This will give you an idea how old it was, how long ago it was. And Reed, Kirk Rallman, who was the guy in the group who did the bit, came up to me and in the student union. And he said, hey, that was real funny last night. You want to be in my group? And I said, yeah. And so I joined his group. And
It's like
that was at the age of 19. I started doing improv. I hadn't the slightest notion of what it was, or what the games were, any of that shit. So I learned them all from the guys. I didn't go to no school or nothing for it.
so no UCB, none of all the other
no.
ones. Yeah.
No groundlings, none of that. And then, did it for a long time. And then I was doing stand-up and hadn't done improv in a couple of years when Whose Line came to San Francisco and auditioned in 1989. But because I had improv background, I was able to jump right in at the audition.
That's crazy. We heard Colin Mockery and his example. I think he was rejected 3 times from Whose Line Is It Anyway? So did you just hear about it and just audition and then you got it? How did it work?
The year before, 1988, I was on the road with another comic named Tom Kenny, who's SpongeBob SquarePants. And he's a huge voiceover artist in LA now, but he was a stand-up comic and we looked the same. We had glasses. And we were playing a terrible place, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, or some fucking Spokane, Washington. And I got a call from Mike McShane, who was on the original British version. And he called me and he goes, hey, man, there's this English improv show in town doing auditions. And I said, I can't make it. I got to play Spokane tonight or whatever. And so I was really depressed. We were living in a condo together over the weekend. I did my stand-up show and I was like, fuck, an English TV show that's doing improv. So Mike got on it. He went over and did an episode. He came back and he was one of my best friends. So he told me all about it. Zebra crossing in a red phone box and, beans and chips in the hall of England. And then they came back the next year because they were so happy they got Mike. And I got on the show. And they auditioned us in a theater in San Francisco. And by the way, I wasn't rejected 3 times. I got on the first time.
That's very cool. I hope you rubbed
Jeff Davis was rejected 3 or 4 times, he's told me. And Chip Eston, who's been on the show off and on for 30 years, not only did he get on the English show, when it came to America, I think they made him audition again for it, even though he'd been on the English one. And I never had to audition. So, and I remember the moment I got on the show because we were doing some improv and there was a TV on in the improv. And I said, look at that television, see those bison or those buffalo or whatever, they're running freely, or those buffalo are running free, or some line like that. And I heard the producer and the other 2 producers fall over laughing. And I thought to myself on stage, they're going to fucking take me to England. And they did. About a couple months later, summer of 89. And then I wasn't even married. That's how long ago this was. I was living with my wife, Jennifer. And then they brought us back for a Christmas special. And I took Jennifer with me. And we were there a couple of days. And I said, what about moving to England? And she goes, I'd love to. So about 4 years later, we moved, 5 years later. And then we lived there for like 5 years.
That's a crazy story. And in terms of regulars, because at the start you had the 4 main regulars, was that a goal to be a regular, or could they only have the 4 main people? Was that a goal?
It was way looser. In England, it was really loose. At the beginning, it was John Sessions, who passed away a couple of years ago or last year. He's a really brilliant improviser. He was the star when I got on. And then McShane, my buddy, became the star after that. But this is the English version.
Yep.
And they just kind of rotated us in and out. Jim Sweeney, Tony Slattery. Tony was on a lot. Sadie Toxvig, Josie Lawrence. Then they had other English guests and whatnot. Paul Merton. And then after a few years in England, I was one of the boys. And then we went to New York in like 90 or 91. And Ryan and Colin came on the show, or like a year after I joined, maybe. And then Ryan and Colin were so strong that by the time we finished the English version, Ryan was kind of on all of them. And then when we started the American one, it happened because Ryan was on Drew Carey's show. And he said to Drew, I'm on this English show. I was on this English show. And he'd show them tapes of it. And he goes, why don't we ask them just if we can produce it in America and shit? And so the reason why it even happened in America was because, one, Ryan was on it. And two, he was on a show with Drew. And as we say in Hollywood, Drew was an 800-pound gorilla, which means you can walk into a room and everybody listens to you. So they were able to sell it to Warner Brothers and ABC. So we did 4 years on ABC. Then we went off the air and had 2 more years on Family Channel and BBC, this, that. And then we've been on the CW for like 8 years, but it has a life of its own now. Yeah. I mean, you know, but that's when Ryan sort of became the regular, the format changed in America to Ryan, Colin, and Wayne, and then another person.
Yeah.
But in England, it was always more muddled. In fact, it wasn't the first season. We did a summer replacement season of 6 episodes when we first got to America, and that one was more muddled up too. Kathy Griffin was on, Captain O'Hara, Stephen Colbert, Phil Lamar, Deborah Wilson, Kathy, Kitty, who played Mimi on Drew Carey. I'm blanking on her name, and she's a good friend of mine. Anyway, so it was once we got going in America that the format became policy.
Interesting. Ed, before we go, I had to ask this question. I've seen that you've done a lot of Bob the Builder roles. Tell me how you got that, because I did not know about this.
Which one?
Bob the Builder.
Oh, right.
Tell me how you got that. That is just, that's
they wanted
very cool.
a voice for North America. Neil Morrissey was the English one. Neil from Men Behaving Badly. Neil Morrissey has kind of a northern English accent, a bit Paul McCartney. This a bit like this, you know. Oh, look what you've done. Oh, well done, mate. You know, that kind of. So he was the English one, and they were making it for Canada and America, which the British show business calls North America. And I went in, and I was doing the audition. This is in Soho in London, and it was all women production company called HIT. And they come over the loudspeaker and they go, Greg, would you mind very much doing it again in your voice? Because I was doing all these funny voices. I'd prepared all these funny voices, like all this. And I said, are you insinuating that I have a funny cartoon voice? And they laughed, and they was like, just would you mind doing it in your voice? And so the voice I'm doing is the voice of Bob the Builder.
That's
well done, Mark. You reduced, you reused, and you recycled. And so I went out in the other room in the studio, and she said, how'd you like to be Bob the Builder? Right there. That's never happened to anyone.
Yeah,
it never happened to me.
Especially a role like that.
Yeah, I said, I'd love to. And I went outside, and with a big mobile phone then, giant mobile phone, the early 2000s, you know, like the kind of mobile phone that made your teeth heat up, you know, and no photographs, just, you know. And I called my agent and I said, call them back right this fucking second. I go, she just offered me the job. I want you to call me right back. Call her and call me right back. So they did. So I did it for about 5 years, and then they sold the company. So there's another Bob the Builder now, of course.
Oh, how dare they? But you got a good run out of it. Quite a few episodes.
I did. I loved being Bob the Builder.
That is a great party story. I hope you go, hey, like people want to be James Bond, but you got to be Bob the Builder. We're going to have to do a part 2 because there's just so much that I could talk to you about. Before we go, how can people follow you? Check out the albums. I know you're touring. I think Whose Line Is It Anyways coming back. And I'll plug all of it in the episode notes as well.
GregProops.com, the Greg Proops Film Club. We're showing Cabaret on September 6th, the next couple of weeks, at the Aero Theater in Santa Monica. You can download all of those on my website, gregproops.com. Those are on SoundCloud. The Smartest Man in the World podcast with me and my wife, Jennifer. is it gregproops.com? who'slive.com. Greg, it's all at Greg Proops. We're on tour again in September. We're not coming to Australia, sadly.
I've got a
but we're
large
touring all over the
American
United
audience, so
I know,
hopefully,
right?
yeah.
So, and then the album's called In the City. That's also on my website, and I think it's like $9 or whatever, and you can download it. No, there's no vinyl yet. People keep asking me if I'm going to do a record of it. We will, but records have to be a short length because they're on vinyl, and downloads can be really long. So we're gonna have to cut the album down to 42 minutes or whatever.
Interesting.
So it's all at gregproops.com. And
Awesome.
I think that's every. Oh, James, my wife and I did a James Joyce. It was the 100th anniversary of the book Ulysses.
Oh, the Ulysses, yeah.
Yeah, and we which I happen to have right here, and you can't see it. There we are. And we were at Shakespeare and Company. We were friends with them in Paris. And because we had done the podcast there a bunch of times, Jennifer organized it. They asked us to read a chapter. So we read a chapter from Ulysses, which is good fun.
That's very cool. Thank you so much. I really, you've got the best vocabulary in the world, but you've also got amazing insights, and to hear your journey has been awesome. And I'm very proud of you, especially with all the things that you're now doing. And yeah, I've learned a lot, and we're going to have to chat soon.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
I think after hearing this chat, it's even more important that we have genuine compassion for all people. At the end of the day, the vast, vast majority of people want the world to be a better place. We may not necessarily agree with their approach, but this is what connects us, for the world to be better. Left, right, middle, genuine disdain for politics. It is through meeting others with radical compassion that helps us all move in a positive direction. We don't need to condemn or shun people, because that actually makes it worse. So let's work together to challenge us in a positive way and work together for a harmonious, loving world. I also really like Greg's sliding door moment when he knew that he wanted to be chosen to perform improv. He decided to do everything in his power to make this happen, and he even sat in the front row of a show in order to better his chances of being chosen to perform. And the rest is history. It is this experience that radically changed his life course. I've been thinking about this for a while, and how important it is to rely on our intuition and seize a moment when a great opportunity presents itself. So I'll leave you with this epic quote by Unknown. We are all time travelers in a sense. We enter a new timeline with every choice we make or refuse to make. We alter time with every movement, thought and emotion. They are all ripples in the cosmic sea of energy. Thank you for listening to the Funny and Failure podcast, exploring the deeper side of comedy.